More than 100 college and university leaders have issued a joint letter condemning the Trump administration's efforts to dictate policies at their private institutions. The letter reads in part, "We speak with one voice against the unprecedented government overreach and political interference now endangering American higher education." Among the people who have signed on is the president of Harvard. The nation's oldest university is at the center of an escalating fight with the White House. And in the latest twist, Harvard is now filing a lawsuit over the freeze of federal funds, which came after the Ivy League school refused to submit to a slew of demands by the Trump administration. Among those demands, that Harvard give the administration access to all university reports on anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim bias on campus generated since October 2023. Also, that the school eliminate DEI programs, make hiring changes, and reform its admissions process. Here's the education secretary in response to Harvard's new lawsuit.
It was a letter that was intended to have both parties sit down again and continue their negotiations. That's what I sincerely hope will happen. But Harvard has now filed a lawsuit. The government will counter. I think we're on very solid grounds that the negotiations that we are having with Harvard and the reason that these funds have been frozen is because of a civil rights issue and not a freedom of speech issue.
And joining us now is Ryan Enos. He is a professor at Harvard and a member of Harvard's chapter of the American Association of University Professors, which is separately suing the Trump administration. Thank you, Professor, for being with us. You hear Secretary McMahon there trying to say it is Harvard that is escalating this with a lawsuit, that this letter was just part of a negotiation, the letter of demands, to be clear. What's your reaction to that?
I think it's an absolutely ridiculous thing to say, and I'm sure that most other people see that as well. Harvard is not escalating anything by simply defending its constitutional rights. That's like would be saying if the government comes in and shuts down a newspaper for saying things they don't like, or tries to shut down a law firm, which incidentally is what the Trump administration has been trying to do, that when that newspaper or that law firm or that university pushes back and says we have a constitutional right to speech, that is an escalation. That's completely against American traditions and American values. When the government attacks people, if they fight back, that is not an escalation of something. It's simply defending your own rights.
She's saying this is a civil rights issue over how Jewish students have been treated. It's not a free speech issue. What's your response to that claim?
You know, similarly, the administration, the Trump administration, is making claims about things that in many ways violate common sense. It's a pretext in order to attack what they consider to be their political enemies. Donald Trump does not care about anti-Semitism, and I don't think any reasonable person would believe he does. He has people in his inner circle that give Nazi salutes. He's dined with white supremacists. And they have said over and over again that there's an issue of anti-Semitism, acute anti-Semitism on Harvard's campus in a way that demands some kind of civil rights intervention. But the acute anti-Semitism does not exist on Harvard's campus. To the extent that there might be anti-Semitism, just like any other bigotry that might exist at Harvard, like it would exist anywhere, that's something that Harvard could take steps to redress, but is not something that requires the cancellation of things like cancer funding for cancer research or research on Alzheimer's disease or all the other things that Donald Trump has tried to attack for political purposes.
Lou Gehrig's disease, the list goes on, and we'll talk a little bit about what some of those cuts mean in a moment. I do want to ask you, though, and let's put aside that this is a president who is historically selective about which anti-Semitism he condemns, because obviously that doesn't mean universities should be. But the Anti-Defamation League, which I note has expressed concern about potential overreach by the administration, says anti-Semitic incidents hit a record high last year in their annual audit that's out today, and that it was fueled in part by campus protests. They have Massachusetts as number 4 nationally for anti-Semitic incidents. They have Boston and Cambridge as the hot spots in Massachusetts. And I know that you told my colleague Jessica Dean this weekend that Harvard has done enough to protect Jewish students on campus. Obviously, you're open to them doing more, but I wonder what you think they should be doing if this deserves further action.
So I believe that any type of bigotry deserves action. And I want to make that crystal clear. But I would challenge the Anti-Defamation League or anybody else to make very clear as well that they can separate constitutional rights, especially ones that come to protesting government action, like students protesting the United States support for Israel and its war on Gaza, from anti-Semitism. And if we start conflating those two things, then we are in very dangerous ground, because people in the United States have an absolute right to protest government action, and that does not make something anti-Semitic. And if you look at what the Anti-Defamation League has claimed, most of those incidents that they claim are incidences of people protesting a war. And that is clearly not anti-Semitism. And in fact, it's something that we should welcome in this country, because we believe in dissent on college campuses or anywhere else.
Yeah, I do want to note, I think they tried to be very careful about not conflating those. But I want to ask you a little bit more about this fight, because in the case of Harvard, you have, as you mentioned, all of this research money. So much of it, I think more than 10% of Harvard's research money, a lot of it has to do with diseases, looking for things to save lives, but it's also computer science, law, engineering, all kinds of things that are very important. And it's not just Harvard, right? When you look at other universities that don't necessarily have the stature, the endowment, the alumni network, I wonder what you think the effect is as this plays out, which could take years, could go to the Supreme Court. What do you think, Professor, the effect of this fight on higher education in America is going to be here in the near term and in the next few years?
Well, look, if the United States government brings to the full brunt of its power against institutions like American universities, then of course it can be very, very damaging. And I think that's something we need to understand, because American universities are one of the great engines of the economy in the United States. They're spread across communities across the United States. They provide so many jobs. They provide a ripple effect out into the type of innovation and technology they provide that provides further jobs. And when those things come under attack, it can really, really limit what the beneficial effects that those universities have on their communities and on the larger United States. And right now, we're fortunate in some ways that the Trump administration has been targeting their attacks to a limited number of universities like Harvard and Columbia and other places, but that is not their intention. Their intention is to chill dissent generally at these universities. And if they pull back government funding from universities more generally, then that could have a devastating effect on the beneficial things that these campuses do, that these universities do across the country.
Yeah, this is a fight with Harvard, but it goes much more broadly. Professor Ryan Enos, thanks for being with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.